Welcome to the Christian Theological Dark Web, a podcast that confronts taboo topics that most churches and Christians want nothing to do with. My name is Ricky Lee, and my co-host is Shelly Aleman. From portals to other dimensions to Nephilim, aliens, gods, and anything else supernatural, we seek to reveal the deep underbelly of evil to give glory to our sovereign creator, Jesus Christ. Let's challenge our notions of reality and shatter our own paradigms. This is the Christian Theological Dark Web Podcast. What's up, Dark Web Theologians? Got an interesting episode here for you. This is the one that I have actually long anticipated. Been telling you guys I've been wanting to talk about alchemy to some of you for a long time. And I got the pleasure to talk to Tim Constatine on the Sixth Sensory Podcast. Definitely go check that out. It's a really, really cool podcast. Guy is a wealth of knowledge. Just very, very intelligent, very, very cool guy. And I totally recommend you check it out. This episode, actually, we recorded on his platform, but he was gracious enough to put it on our platform as well. So we really hope you guys enjoy this one. This is just me and him, but hope you guys enjoy. God bless. Shalom, shalom. And as always, Maranatha.
Welcome back to the show. Got a good one planned for you tonight. We're going to get into some fun subjects, maybe a little bit of alchemy, maybe some Nazi stuff. We'll see where it goes. Joining me is the host of the Christian Theological Dark Web, Ricky. Thanks for coming on, man.
Absolutely. Tim, dude, what a pleasure. I've caught some of your stuff before, man. Really great content. Shelly is my co-host, and she was like, dude, just go do the show. You're interested in alchemy. Go do it. All right, I'll do it. So this is kind of my first flying solo mission.
She could have come on too. I didn't even think about that.
I know.
I thought maybe she would, but either way, we're going to roll with it.
It's all good. We'll have you back on at some point, and then we get to both interview, bro.
There we go. But finish your thought.
Oh, no, you're fine. You're fine, man. So anyway, Shelly, actually, my co-host, was the one that recommended the one about, it had to do with like blood sacrifices or the power of blood or something like that. I can't remember who this was.
That was probably Ed Mabry.
That's who it was.
Yeah.
It was a great podcast. Really interesting information. Really, really good vibe too, man.
Thank you.
Really, really cool.
I thought for some reason, you were going to talk about this Secrets of Gold episode I put out a long time ago.
Oh, okay.
And it was because it's an alchemical kind of a thing. It's like, it was like one of my first alchemy shows I ever did was on just through the ages, how the role of gold in the esoteric arts.
Yeah.
And I mean, we barely even scratched the surface, knowing some of the stuff I know now and some of the stuff that's in this book that we're going to talk about. I mean, but like, ask me that question again about you asked me something before the show and I was like, let's just start the show.
Oh, I was talking about there was a promo that you had, I saw on Instagram the other day, and it was some Nazi's face and it had a red stone beside it. And I was like, Philosopher's Stone? Nazis? Is he already doing this? And I just wasn't aware. I was like, are we talking about the same thing?
No, I wasn't already doing it. However, I went on the Biblical Hitman podcast.
Oh, right on.
And was talking about occult Nazism and the esoteric arts and all that, etc. Right? Somehow alchemy came up. No, the Philosopher's Stone specifically came up.
Yeah.
So
Yes, it does.
And it's crazy because I wasn't ready for that question, but I did my best on there to like answer that
on the fly. Yeah,
on the fly. And it's crazy because since that show, well, basically on that show, the answer I gave was me pulling from like the library in my mind.
Sure.
Of, like stuff I've read in alchemical texts.
Right.
I was like on the show trying to remember like, okay, what are some of the highlights of this that I've read from books from like the 15, 16, 1700s. So I like try to give them that answer. But it's funny because since then, I knew you and I were going to do this show.
Yeah.
So I got to reading in this book we're going to talk about today. It's The Philosopher's Stone by Joseph Farrell. And I've got a page in here, and I'll get to it because it's in my notes.
Cool. Do it, man. Do it.
And I'll get to it later, but basically his sort of description of the Philosopher's Stone from the text he's pulling from matched closely the answer I gave on Biblical Hitman. So I was like, yes.
I did get it.
Right? Because the Philosopher's Stone is tricky. it's a lot of different things to different people, right?
Yeah, well, and it is actually a lot of different things. In particular, we use the word stone, and that's a misnomer, as you probably well know. And if your audience has followed for any time, anything you've talked about alchemy. Alchemy is so tricky with verbiage. It's so tricky with esoteric and exoteric, right? So like people can understand the basic concept of what the Philosopher's Stone is and does, but like how it's confectioned, how it's brought about, what it draws on, what it really implies, to have it, use it, desire it, all those things, right? Like it's a very tricky subject. So, I
Yeah.
applaud you, dude. It's tough. It is tough.
Yeah. Well, and this is a point that I try to get across on that show. Depends on who you read.
Right.
Depends on, because I think, who was it? When I looked into Nicholas Flamel, I found out that there was 3 different types of Philosopher's Stone that you sort of see throughout history. And I don't remember, one is a red stone, like in that promo for that episode, they showed that red stone. So what's that famous red stone?
Which is kind of the typical thing that everybody thinks of, right? When you think Harry Potter, you're like, oh, it's a red stone, of course, right?
Right. But then there's other colors, and there's 3 other stones that, sort of pop up. So, or 2, rather, that pop up in addition to that one. So, and it's quite an enigma, because it's not always a stone. Sometimes it's a powder.
Yep.
Sometimes it's a tincture or a elixir.
Liquid. Yep.
Right.
Yep. Exactly.
So we'll get into some of that today, man. I'm excited to. That's the Philosopher's Stone, man. The enigma that it is. We'll chip away at it today.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Well, take it away, brother. This is your show, man. Bring it on, bro. What are you looking for?
Let's do it, man. When you're talking about this author who we're talking about today, Dr. Joseph P. Farrell, this is someone who does epic breakdowns.
Yes.
I heard him recently talking about the concept of creating something out of nothing. And this gets into Genesis, right? In the Bible.
Sure.
It takes a mind like Farrell, though, to lay that kind of a thing out in a very precise way.
Yeah.
So he's talking about how you see this cross mythologies, this something out of nothing. Like it's in the Kalevala, I've found. I don't know if he brought that up, but I do see it in that myth. And I know Tolkien wrote about it too, because Tolkien put out that Silmarillion book, which is like the origin story to the Lord of the Rings universe. Tolkien is drawing heavily from the Kalevala folklore, Finnish folklore in that. So what he shows in there is that this sort of like an angelic race pre-exists the earth, pre-exists mankind.
Right.
They sing things into existence. They use vibration, frequency to sing things into existence. And if you go real deep into the esoteric aspects of Genesis and how God created or spoke, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God. It's a similar kind of a concept, perhaps.
Well, and that's one of the coolest things about this, right? Like, to me, as I started reading this, and as I went back and took notes on this, because I left my little notes, and I left my little things like here and there in the books I could come back and revisit. I mean, look at my book, for God's sake. It's all like crazy.
Well, I thought mine was in beat up condition. Yours is, and I don't mean that in a bad way.
Mine was new, bro. Mine was brand new, and
really,
it's like
that's how it's supposed to be, bro. That's how it's supposed to be.
That's right. And one thing that I've really, when I was rereading this, and I had this concept in my head, right? Like it's very fascinating, because when you read a book like this with so much content, and then you reread it, you're like, oh yes, okay, I'm solidifying this idea that I already had, and now this makes it a little bit clearer. And one of the coolest things about this is that it essentially mentions that alchemy was one of 3 essential cornerstones in the fabric of the universe, or the fabric of the understanding of the universe and the way that everything worked together, right? So you had essentially, let me pull it up real quick here before I mess it up on my own. Right?
Yeah, I'm going to add to that while you pull it up.
Do it, man. Go for it.
Farrell said something else recently that I heard that stuck with me, and he was talking about free energy essentially. And I think this is going to play off of what you're talking about right now. Farrell said something along the lines of, I'm paraphrasing, there really is no such thing as free energy, because he's like, I don't know why they call it that, because they're getting it from somewhere.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I think that's the ticket here. I get why it's called free energy, because it's in nature, it's free. I get it. But he's saying, no, you're essentially borrowing it or taking it from somewhere. I think that's the ticket. The ticket being, we have forces all around us all the time. It's just a matter of tapping into them, knowing how to utilize them. That's the keys to the conversation we're going to have today. Because for me, that's a big part of alchemy, in my opinion, is tapping into the natural, like, atmospheric forces, whether it be a force field, a rock, or an herb.
Yeah. No, and you made a really important point there when you said that he makes a distinction between free energy and it being drawn from somebody, right? Because there's a linguistic misnomer there when you say that it's free energy, because that implies that it's not coming from anything, or anyone is a better way to say it, right? Like that there's no actual source that it's coming from, that it's just kind of a absent process, just kind of happening. And if anything, good God, man, I mean, I can't imagine anybody, even with an exoteric, like the most basic understanding of alchemy, you have to know that there's some spiritual component, automatically, like, it's like encrusted into the very concept of alchemy itself, right? Alchemy is a spiritual undertaking by nature, right? You're literally like enacting more of a ritual than you are an actual chemical formula, although the chemical formula helps you get to that purpose, right? Like that's really what it is. And I think that pulls right back from what you were just saying, Tim, which is that free energy is not really free. Like it actually does come from someone. Now, who you think that someone is, right?
Or something
different. Right.
Something.
Right.
Sure though. I'm with you. Like,
what I mean by that is a sentience, if just to clarify. That's where I'm going.
That's where my mind went to as well. And and that's not necessarily embodied by something all the time, although it can be.
Right.
And I'm not correcting you. I'm just saying, I'm just thinking about it out loud.
No, you're good. Like, you're good, man.
That's this is force field idea.
Yeah.
But the force field has sentience.
Yes.
Yes. And I think modern science has discovered this, man. I did a big deep dive on CERN lately. And if you read their sort of mission statement, they've since I started talking about it, they took it down. And I don't know if it's because of me or what, but I just thought it was funny. But they used to have a mission statement up on their website that talked about the Higgs boson particle, and basically they laid out their idea of the Big Bang, and they keep talking about referencing this force field, and they're doing it just the right way, so it's scientific and not spiritual, right?
Yeah,
they don't want they don't want to acknowledge, but I think it's sentient.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, man. I mean, absolutely. And we see this kind of thing with UFO abductees, what they make claims about regarding the actual UFOs themselves, right? These, or UAPs, or whatever you want to call them, that they have a level of sentience and that they respond in a way that implies some sort of understanding, right? That there's an actual, like, mental process of some sort going on there. But going back to the triune stone of lost science, this is what I wanted to mention. So it's a fragmentation of which is threefold. The Sumerians, who preserved primarily the astrological and the astronomical component, right? We have the Hebrews that conserved largely the Kabbalistic component. And then the Egyptians, which really kind of, not heralded, what's the word? Kept or guarded the alchemical component. And so that's really what we see. And we see these three kind of be pulled apart.
One was Sumerian, one was Hebrew.
Sumerian, Hebrew, and Egyptian.
That's right. Yeah. I remember this part, but I'm glad you picked up notes on it, because I did not. The triune stone is very dense. It's a dense concept.
That's an understatement.
But I think you're laying it out nicely there. I mean, and I don't know if you're going to this part, but he seems to liken it to the Trinity.
Yes. Well, that's a really great point that you bring that up. And it's interesting because they call it lost sciences as though they were, they're separate. But I think that that's the way we think about them. And that's what's really, truly fascinating about alchemy as well, right? Like, because alchemy references, like, the origin point over and over and over, right? And just like you're talking about, you have this trifecta going on, this trinity going on as well, which he does. He references really well, and he talks about how Augustine would use that reference as the Holy Spirit, God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit, as a reference to the three pieces or the three aspects that the stone can take, right? Like the stone, just like you talked about, it could be elixir, it could be the powder, or it could actually be a physical stone of some sort that would imbue whatever power it was being used for at that time.
That's it, and that's a very exciting part of this book too. So that he gets into that, and he's willing to go there and go that deep into it. So what you find with this book is like page 1. What Dr. Farrell does is he kind of lays out that the book pivots on 3 substances: American gold, Soviet mercury, and Nazi serum.
Yep.
So it's from the jump, it's sort of implied that he's going to touch on the alchemical nature of those 3 substances. And he works the book around that sort of 3-part, I don't know what we'd call it, plot or whatever.
Dynamic.
Dynamic. There you go. There you go. And I actually laughed when I read his line, because early on, he's addressing stuff, right? And he says, something along the lines of, if you merely speak the word alchemy, you will make a real scientist uncomfortable, perhaps even belligerent. I thought that was great, because modern scientists, they're not willing to put their nose in the alchemical text and see what it's all about. It's just been shunned, right? But then Dr. Farrell introduces the conspiracy,
right?
If I can call it that. This is all in like the first 3 pages, I think, for people listening. He says, as you read this book, you're going to see evidence that a very different and exotic form of physics exists that is being pursued by elites, power players,
off the books,
the book. So I'm all about this stuff. That premise is all I need to start every podcast I ever do for the rest of my life.
No kidding, dude.
Those are elements that I can riff off without a doubt in this book. So I want to lay that out.
No, you're good, man. That's a great place to start, frankly. And I'm glad you mentioned. That's funny you say that. I literally have that underlined right here.
Off the books part.
Nice. Occulted laboratories of the world's major powers. Yep, that's exactly right.
That's what it is, man. That's what we're contending with right now.
It is. And you know what? That
whether you're Christian or not,
right?
I mean, honestly, I think it's kind of, I get the shady eye for people for being into alchemy as a Christian. Of course, I'm just learning about it. It's not like I'm not practicing, but because there is a magical component to this, but not always. Not always.
Well, there can be, right? Too. I mean, it's an interesting thing, because a lot of the early, and we have to kind of take it with a grain of salt too. So let me preface what I'm about to say by saying take this with a grain of salt, but we also have to understand that a lot of early church fathers, a lot of early Christians were philosophers, and they were actively pursuing the Philosopher's Stone. Now you might say, well, they were part of such and such a society and such society. Okay, well, fair enough. I'm not gonna tell you it has to be X, Y, or Z. As we well know in this space, like it's usually the both and. It's very rarely like black or white. It's almost never black or white. I mean, it's a very weird thing to say. In fact, the only black and white we have in this book is the changing of colors of the actual stone itself, right? But I think that you make a really good point, and it's important to understand that what you and I might call metaphorical kind of concepts that appear in alchemy are just as important as the physical processes that occur in alchemy as well. And so if we're to take it, kind of just at face value, well, then maybe we will just reject it out of hand. But if we do dig just a little bit, like you really do see, and I'm coming from a Christian perspective, obviously I'm part of the Christian Theological Dark Web podcast, right? So, I'm going to give you my worldview coming straight forward. When we see the ether, and I'm hesitant to give this away, right? When we're talking about the materia prima, right? Prima materia, I can't remember which it is. Materia prima. the ether. It's got tons of different names, right? Like the initial substrate, undifferentiated material. In my mind, and we can explore this, but in my mind, bro, that is what Revelation talks about, the scroll being rolled up at the end of the age. That's what God rolls up. Everything's written on it. It's all written on the materia prima. And actually, I'm not gonna lie. This is a full disclosure here. There's a part of this book that as the more I read it, I was kind of like inclining this way and more inclining this way and just a little more, until like all out, I realized like this is a legit concept. Like this is an actual thing that happens, is that our intentions, that our feelings, our desires, all those things, they are written on the actual fabric of the materia prima itself, which is why God can roll it up as a scroll at the end of time. And if you look at other authors like John Burke, who talks about imagine heaven, when people go and they have these out-of-body experiences, or post-death experiences, I guess we'll call them, they literally are confronted with like an entire, what they call a life review. They have like a full out life review of everything that's written down. I mean, it's like, it's all recorded, and it's recorded in ways that I can't even begin to express here. But
what about this? This is a concept I stumbled across looking into some really dark corners of ufology, but there are people who are having entity encounters of the UFO kind, and these entities were imparting information to these people, and what it was they were referencing some sort of a mass of consciousness that exists maybe in the cosmos somewhere, but the entities are waiting for that to fill up. And what it was is everybody's life experience gets added to this mass consciousness, like a big cosmic database.
Sounds like the Akashic record.
Right. And that rolls right into it too.
Right.
And these entities were saying once that's full, that's when, your Ragnarok, your apocalypse, your end of the world stuff, that's when they wrap it up, right?
Yeah.
Or that's when it's wrapped up, right?
It's wrapped up.
By a higher power.
Yeah.
Now, does that fit into this? Because I always thought that was such a wild concept.
It is a wild concept. And let me make sure I don't want to misrepresent the idea itself, but essentially that these entities, these UFO associated entities, are saying that once the consciousness, what will we call it, the consciousness database is full, that the scroll will be rolled up. Is that what I'm understanding?
That's what I'm saying. Yeah. If both could be true. Now I do think.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't want to tread on the waters of.
No. Shred as much as you want, dude.
It's just like I've talked about entities a lot on here, and I'm trying to take a break from it because I know it weirds people out a lot. But basically, I don't think you can trust all these messages that you get from entities, but sometimes there's a little grain of truth in there. And I just thought it was an interesting concept. But
Tim, I would dare say it's the other way around, bro. I know this might be a very unpopular opinion, or this might weird people out, but I think it's the inverse. I think that there's a lot more truth that's tailored into the explanation than there is lie. I think that there's way more truth, because you wouldn't be sold on it if there weren't a solid amount of truth, right?
Right.
Like, you don't have a whole plot to kill someone unless you have a lot of good reasons for it, right? The same thing is true. Like there's tons of truth that's mixed in there until there's just a few bad seeds that are like, yeah, no, but I can't buy this tiny portion over here. And so let me come back to your concept real quick and answer you. I will say in a way that, I mean, from my perspective, I would say yes. Now, I think that is possible. I think that they can overlap, and I think that they can even dovetail. And the reason I think so is because when God talks about the end of time, when does the end of time come? The end of time comes, the Ragnarok, or whatever we want to call it, right? That comes, biblically speaking, when everyone has had a chance to embrace Christ as Savior or not. So from a biblical perspective, I have no problem accepting that kind of idea. Now, you may have these entities over here saying that the database consciousness being full means something totally different to what I just told you. And you may have esotericists or other, believers of other religions that'll tell you that it's otherwise as well. But what you're asking is whether or not that can fit squarely in a biblical paradigm. Absolutely.
Sure.
Absolutely.
Sure. I see a ton of this happening. I see it throughout my research all the time.
Yeah.
Where ideas that are being perpetuated in occult doctrines fit fine within a biblical paradigm or within the biblical doctrine. They don't clash. And like, I'm trying to be very careful about how I talk about that these days, because I know that Biblical Hitman podcast I did, for instance, I know I said some stuff on there that is going to be pursued, because that's a very Christian forward show. And I am a Christian, but I'm a little bit more liberal maybe than some. But anyway, I think I said some stuff on there that's going to be perceived as slippery to some Christians, because I don't know if they understand where I'm coming from, because I'm not promoting the occult when I say that the occult is not entirely bad.
Right.
I'm saying some of this knowledge can be used for good, and it can definitely be used for bad. And some of it, there's this huge sect of people that's been forgotten totally by history, the esoteric Christians. A lot of those guys were not evil people. They were having conversations like the one we're having today, I think.
Sure.
That is my strong suspicion. But they have Christ in their heart as well, that they're having, but they went deep into this stuff, and they believed in, like, example, probably not the best example of a Christian figure, but Paracelsus. He was a Christian, from what I could tell. He was one of these esoteric Christians. And he talks about going back to this conversation we just had about these entities, he talks about the Olympic spirits, this hierarchy of beings that rule certain sections of the cosmos. It's a lot like what you see in the Bible after the Tower of Babel, where God splits up the nations and puts principalities over the nations. There's some sort of a guardian, guiding entity that's over sects of people. Same sort of a concept Paracelsus is referring to with the Olympic spirits. Beneath the Olympic spirits, you have these sort of elemental creatures that alchemists would work with. They were cryptid-like, I guess, or fairy-like. And to put it in our terms, they're like sylphs, nymphs, dryads, gnomes maybe was one of them. But you see what I'm saying? So there's a hierarchy of entities there that was kind of woven into the fabric of this work that some of the alchemists embarked upon. And that's sketchy, because when you bring magic in, then you're really going to look slippery to most Christians.
Well, we have to. So there's a few things you said, and I don't. To be honest, as far as I could tell, I don't think we disagree on anything, man. I think I agree with everything you just said. But I want to give some some clarifying points, from my perspective.
Oh, and two, there's a lot we don't know. That's why this is important for us to hash this out. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, that's fine, man. Excuse me. I'm drinking my coffee, man. I'm trying to get warm. It's all cold in my house. So everything that we're looking at is nature. It's the design that God gave to this reality that we live in, right? I watched a really interesting presentation. I can't say podcast. Guy was actually giving a presentation, and it was really funny. The first half of it was like mind-bendingly mind-opening. It was great. It was so good. The key takeaway there is that there are two kind of worlds. One is what we would call Newtonian physics, and the other is what we would call quantum physics. Okay. Now, they work in tandem, but we don't always understand how they work in tandem. And I really like this Newtonian physics and quantum physics, because he even breaks it down a little further and says that there's Newtonian physicality and quantum physicality. And I'm trying to lay a base here, so when we start coming to these concepts, it'll be a little bit easier to tread on these waters. No pun intended. So when we're talking about Newtonian physical matter, it's what you and I consist of. This hand that's in front of me, right? This hand is Newtonian physical matter. But quantum matter might be a lot easier to be interpreted in a spiritual sense, right? Because here's a concept that's really been floating around, bouncing in my head a lot, is just because you don't have Newtonian physical matter does not mean you are not physical. So just because you don't have a human body or I don't know, an aardvark's body for that matter, right, does not mean you're not physical. We are a version of physicality, but there are higher versions of physicality, and we can see this actually referenced if we look at this from a Enochian, and I mean like the biblical kind of tradition of Enochian and the actual Bible itself. There's a really great book.
There's two Enochs. I want to riff on that in a minute.
Yeah. That's fine. Absolutely.
Because it's going. I want to tie all this up because of with the two worlds idea. But keep going. And also, let me just add, since we were talking about the spirit world right before we launched into this, Blavatsky was, she was a medium. She was. I believe there's a spiritual realm. I believe you could contact it and all this. I think that she was doing exactly that. Blavatsky knew about what you're talking about in the 1800s. She was describing quantum physics before it existed.
Yep.
She said there is an atom and it can be split. And she was going up against the science of the day, which was probably on the, maybe, I don't know where they were at. They were more like science's not material or something like that. I don't know what, not quite sure, but whatever she was saying was not welcomed.
Probably more like natural scientists versus natural science versus precise science.
Right. She was up against Darwin and all those guys too, with her thoughts. But like she was talking about particles. She was saying, going back to the beginning of this conversation, the force field, the sentient force field. She said there is a force field that is moved. These forces are moved by particles. And so she's describing particle physics and quantum physics as well. The more you read, it's crazy. She knew about that because of this conversation we just had about how you do get some truth from the other side. Downloads that as well.
Yeah. And so what there's a really great book, whose name I can't reference. Oh, I remember it. It's called Revising Reality. That's what it's called. Revising Reality. Really great book. It's got several authors. But one of the things that they talk about, they reference an older book called, is it 2D World? Essentially, the concept of this book is that there is a world in which everything is two-dimensional, but when a three-dimensional hand reaches into it, then it appears as a two-dimensional particle or a two-dimensional figure. So even though you're putting your hand straight in, all they see are four little circles that are just in the sky in their two-dimensional world, right? And so what they do in Revising Reality is they liken that same concept to the Nephilim, for example.
That's also the cover of the Nine Inch Nails album, Year Zero.
Which is
giant hand coming out of the sky, but you only see the fingers. Yeah.
Oh, cool. That's interesting. I need to listen to that album. Anyway,
it might very well be a nod to this concept.
Oh, wow. Interesting. Okay. So, the same, they just lay out the same concept with regard to the Nephilim, right? If you are a super dense creature, right, coming from having at least in part, right, because these are hybrid creatures, at least in part having your, let's call it, non-Newtonian physicality, right, placed in a body in a world where there is Newtonian physicality, right? And I'm talking about our physicality when I talk about that. If you can't go anywhere else, where do you go to? You go up and out. Your girth and your height are going to increase because you have nowhere else to go in question to physicality, because you're another dimensional being transported into a third dimension. So yeah, of course you look terrifying and huge and confusing. And why are you like this big giant thing? Well, because there's nowhere else to have this fit into the paradigm. Oh my gosh.
You can see some of the hand, but I don't know. This was his album where he kind of alludes to
It's a great album, by the way.
UFOs and all kinds of stuff like what we're talking about. It's there. He was ahead of his time with this one. I mean, he was tapping into
Old
something.
Trent, man.
Talking
Old
about
Trent.
downloads. I think this is one of those guys who gets those downloads. But
That's interesting. Yeah, you know what?
There's a song on here called Twilight that is phenomenal.
That whole album I really like, actually. I am a Nine Inch Nails fan. He's a really, really talented guy. It's interesting you mentioned him just kind of as an offshoot, but there's something really particularly interesting about his lyrics. If you ever read his lyrics, they're very simple. They're not complicated, but his music is like next level genius, dude. I mean, no, you don't come up with stuff like that easily. Like, that's not something that most people can do.
He understands the power of aesthetic and audible aesthetic because, you know, as I've played guitar for 20 plus years, and his guitar parts are very simple, but they're very powerful because he understands it's just not how you play, it's what
layering and ambience and atmosphere.
Yeah, and all that. But I'm going to get us back to this book real quick. That's cool, man. I'm glad we went down this physics thing. It's wrapped up in this, right?
Yeah.
I just a thought on something. So somewhere between page 2 and 7. Okay. Farrell, I just have a thought on something something else he lays out.
Yeah.
And actually, let me say this, because you're talking about the two worlds, right? I think there's two versions of this knowledge that we're talking about today. I think they both came personally. I think they both came from the garden. I think things were taught to Adam. Adam taught them to his children. And we know Cain left the garden. Cain started his own civilization. And if you look at the line of Cain, you see the bad Enoch. You see Lamech. You see Tubal-Cain and the Freemason legends that this knowledge was kept through his line, right? But I think there was also a line that wasn't necessarily there was a line from Adam that kept some of this knowledge as well. Didn't really necessarily do bad things with it, right? So I think keep that in mind because one of the things Farrell lays out here is this gap he presents.
Yeah.
Where he talks about a gap where we don't know who had use of the esoteric knowledge between 300 AD and 1100 AD. Now, 1100 AD is when the Templars sprang up. And that's where you see some of this knowledge start to resurface, right? I just think that's interesting. Like with some of the deep dives I've been doing, it's like I would suggest that knowledge simply didn't disappear. It went somewhere. I think maybe it was stored in Arabia. Because now we're talking about alchemists here, because alchemists played a big part in the keeping of this knowledge. And where did it go for this gap that Farrell lays out, right? Well, right in the middle of that gap is 700 AD, which is the time of the Arab alchemist Jabir. So I think the Arabs had this stuff for this mysterious gap. And I think some of it was stored in Petra. Where Petra is an Edomite stronghold.
Oh, wow, that's interesting.
Now, so you remember in the Bible where it says Esau left, took his wives. He married Nephilim, Horim women, and Canaanites, by the way. So right. You know, the line of Esau is the beginning of the Edomites. In the Bible, he takes all his possessions, his wives, and all his stuff, and he goes to a mountain in the area of Seir. Right? That's Petra. Petra's right next to Mount Seir.
Oh, wow.
So that's where he settled. And everybody remembers that Indiana Jones movie where you see that ornate. Yeah, that's
Petra.
Yeah, that's Petra. That's Edomite. That's the Canaanites and the Nephilim that he married into, I think, had this knowledge. And they stored it there, right? So like
that's interesting.
The history will tell you that the Nabateans built that, but they moved in after the Edomites did. So anyway, I think there's a lot of, like, I'm sure other people could probably fill in Farrell's gap here, but I think that accounts for some of it, you know. I think that, you know, like, I don't know, man, like the Amalekites, they were a line of Esau too. They're the ones who like said to be Amalekite means blood liquor or something like that. Like they were totally.
That's interesting. I don't know that.
This was a Nephilim. religion.
Yep.
It turned into the cult of Kos and a lot of other stuff you see in that region. So I just wanted to touch on that because, I mean, I think it's fascinating. Like, it's like the question of where did this knowledge go? And I think also Constantinople is another place where this knowledge went. I mean, I don't know if you know much about the Byzantine Empire, but
I don't, man. That's actually one of those things that I'm like, I really need to research this more. I keep seeing it pop because it pops up everywhere, right? I mean,
right.
It's a huge portion of history.
Byzantine kicks off in 300 AD. Right at the beginning
right
of
around
Farrell's Gap, right? And during the Dark Ages, so Constantinople is like the center of the Byzantine Empire, right? Constantinople was thriving during the Dark Ages. This is what they don't tell you. This is what they
true.
they were having a blast in Constantinople, in Turkey, and in the Arab world while Europe was experiencing the Dark Ages, because the Dark Ages was brought on by the church and, you know, facilitated by dark forces. But these people, I don't know, they had a renaissance, they had a perpetual renaissance happening. And Constantinople falls around 1400 AD. And that's when, as soon as 1400 to 1500, as soon as Constantinople falls, that's when the Renaissance sparked in Europe, because all these people left Constantinople, went up into Europe, and brought all this knowledge with them. And that's when you see Hermetics show up in Italy through guys like Giordano Bruno. He shows up on the scene in the 1500s, fits right into this timeline. So basically, the Catholics made up the name Byzantine and changed history. So nobody sort of knew. I don't know what they were trying to cover something up, but the Byzantine Empire fits perfectly in this gap that Farrell presents. So anyway, thanks for letting me go down that rabbit hole. But like Turkey, Constantinople, Petra, probably alchemical hubs of the ancient world.
That's very interesting, dude.
And there's another guy, 600 AD, kind of right in the middle of that gap too, was Stephanos of Alexandria. He's a part of the Byzantine Empire under Heraclius, I think is how you say his name.
Yes. Yeah.
Both of them were into alchemy. So when Stephanos moved to Constantinople in 610, he moved there, no doubt, to practice alchemy in Turkey under this emperor Heraclius or however you say it. So I don't know. Just to toss in some history here.
No, that's good, dude.
This stuff was perpetuated probably. So, Turkey butts right up to the bottom of Europe. I think the next country is Moldova or something like that.
Got a really interesting spot.
And then Romania is right there as well. So it's the bottom of, there's actually a line between the Dark Ages and the not Dark Ages, where they're still probably practicing alchemy. Alchemy probably just made its way back up into Europe after this cloak from the church of the Dark Ages.
You know, you were talking, so there, I mean, there's like a bajillion thoughts going through my mind right now. One of the things that you said is really important is that, that this knowledge,
it comes out of an older batch of knowledge, just to tie a bow on that. Yeah.
No. That's exactly where I'm going, actually. And I'm glad you said, you were talking about Adam from the beginning, right? And that he had this esoteric knowledge. You're absolutely right. For us, it's esoteric. For him, it was common knowledge, right? These were common concepts for him. These were common technologies, if we want to call them that, for him. And anything that's occulted becomes occulted through time or, perpetual or decisive obfuscation, right? Like that's how that happens. But I think there's something to be said about any empire that refuses to die, like at least its core concepts or its core ways of life refuse to die. One is precisely what you're talking about, the Arab world. I mean, clearly, like ancient Egypt lives even today, really, dude. I mean, like, let's just be straight up honest. I would say the same thing is true, and this is not to go in this direction, just kind of mentioning it, is what I studied actually in college a whole lot was China. China was ransacked time and time again, and instead of like conforming to whoever was coming in overtaking them, whoever overtook them just was like, well, we'll just sinify ourselves, we'll just become Chinese, same kind of concept. Like It just kind of got absorbed into it.
China may have been one of Noah's sons, right?
Yep. Yeah.
And Farrell talks about that in this book. He talks about how he's citing Paracelsus, actually, and they lay out how this, going back to this knowledge thing, Abraham, is that right? No, Noah. I'm sorry. Noah preserved some knowledge before the flood.
He sure does. Yes, he mentions the tablets that are
underneath
Mount Sons.
Right. So after the flood, Noah goes down to the bottom of this mountain, like Petra almost, where they stored their knowledge, and retracts, or no, like, whatever. He takes out this knowledge that was stored down there.
Yeah.
Now Ararat or one of the other mountains.
If you actually look at, is it Jubilees? I want to say the Book of Jubilees. It actually talks about this. I think it's one of the grandsons of Noah. Maybe I'm wrong, but one of the grandsons of Noah finds the actual teachings on a tablet of the Watchers. And
that's the Tubal. No, go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, you're good. You're good. That's one of the methods of transmission. That's all I was going to say.
No. Okay. So that's all right. So here it is. It's on page 52. But the alchemical science itself, Paracelsus, clearly states comes from Adam. Adam was able to predict the world's destruction by water. From this cause, too, it came about that his successors erected 2 tablets of stone on which they engraved all natural arts and hieroglyphic characters, in order that their posterity might also become acquainted with this prediction, that it might be heeded and provisions made in a time of danger. That's dense stuff. But anyway, so okay, here's the part I'm getting to. Subsequently, Noah found one of those tablets under Mount Ararat. After the deluge. In this table, or on these tablets, were described the courses of the upper firmament and of the lower globe. Sorry, guys, these guys believed in space and planet-shaped balls, or ball-shaped planets. Sorry, y'all. That's what they believed, clearly. But moving on.
Are you a flat earther, by the way?
No.
Okay. No, me either.
I don't know what the Earth shape is, but I'm not totally on board with that. But anyways, at length, this universal knowledge was divided in several parts and lessened in its vigor and power. By means of the separation, one man became an astronomer, another a magician, another a Kabbalist, and a fourth an alchemist. Abraham, that volcanic Tubal-Cain, he's likening Abraham to Tubal-Cain in a sense that he was a knowledge keeper.
Yes.
Abraham is a consummate astrologer and a arithmetician.
Yeah.
He carried the art of the land of Canaan into Egypt, whereupon the Egyptians rose to so great a height and dignity that this wisdom was derived from them by other nations. You can infer here is that Noah's sons got a hold of some of this knowledge. There's 3 of them, right? 3 sons, and they went to 3 different parts of the world and probably took some of that with them.
Yeah.
And maybe it was split up into these groups. Like some of it was astronomy, some of it was magic, some of it was alchemy. You could maybe infer that, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So there's 2 versions, like I said. There's 2. It seems to me that there's two versions, or 2. There's a crossroads. There's a split in the roads where this information goes after Adam and after Cain. Cain's line, Tubal-Cain. Tubal-Cain was in Cain's line. He gets it. The legend is that they caught wind that there was going to be a flood as well.
Right.
And they sealed the knowledge on tablets underneath the Great Pyramid, who their great-grandpa, the bad Enoch, built.
I'm following you. I'm tracking.
Yeah. So that would be like, probably at that point, since it's Cain's line, this knowledge had been kind of moved into more of that witchcraft type of a realm.
Yeah.
And you've got the line of Abraham or Noah.
Yes. Well, same thing.
Same thing. Who has maybe it's the same knowledge, but they're not doing the same stuff with it, right?
Right. Well,
I just never hear this talked about.
No. It's a good topic, man. And so there's a few things, right? One is what we call magic. We're actually, I'm going to do an episode with, Shelly and I are doing an episode with Christina from Sasquatch and
Yes.
Sourdough.
Yes.
And we're talking about reenchantment. So one thing is she's like, I think that the word magic got hijacked. And although we associate it with the negative esotericism, right? She's like, I think that was hijacked. And so I'm a little on the, and not so sure how I feel about that particular word, but I will say for things like mystic and things like, I don't know, sage, stuff like that. Those words hold a lot of baggage today, but for me, they don't hold any particular baggage. They just mean a person that was seeking out spiritual things, and not necessarily obsessed with them. Just they were seeking a spiritual life. So when we talk about magic, I think that, just because that's the way I am, dude. Linguistics is my background, and that's kind of where I always really try to stem from when I make sure that I understand something. So I would say, yeah, I mean, absolutely. If we're going to define it as magic as like the interaction with a spiritual force, through some sort of ritual, I guess we could say, then sure, by all means, I have no problem with that definition whatsoever. Now the twisting might be what we're really going to draw a distinction on, right? Right. And I would say that the twisting of, let's call it magic for ease's sake. The twisted magic versus the godly magic. And I'm obviously coming from a Christian worldview. Again, I mentioned that. I think that there's something to be said about that. I really do. And I think that a lot of these abilities in general are now latent because of the deleterious mutations that have happened over thousands and thousands of years, right? Like, this is not the way we were created to be. You and I were not created to be having podcasts over some blue light screen, like sharing esoteric and important knowledge this way, right? Like, ultimately, for me, in my mind, all these things are for the glory of God. Like, all these things that we study is
not all our esoteric concepts are bad.
They're not.
That's what
esoteric just means, that it's hidden, right? It doesn't mean that it's bad.
And the Bible's full of awesome,
tons of esoteric stuff, dude.
Although you're not going to hear most pastors using that word to describe it, because that word has kind of gotten an association with the occult.
Sure.
But it doesn't take away from the fact that what the word means and the word applies to what's in the Bible, for sure. There's just good versions and bad versions of knowledge. That's what we're talking about here.
That's right. Or employments, I would even say.
Yeah.
Right? Like, because if you read Enoch, the first Enoch, it very clearly lays out what the Watchers gave. It gave useless knowledges. That's what the actual words are used. They were useless knowledges. It's not that they weren't knowledges. They were just useless. Mm-hmm. And, you can take that word useless to mean a lot of different things. I haven't done a full etymological dive there, but there's a lot to be sorted through there. None of least doesn't necessarily have to be alchemy. Alchemy is just a practice. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's a useless thing. I mean, we have clear Christian individuals talking about the purification of the soul, right? And if you actually, I think it was how do you say his freaking name?
I get it wrong all the time. I say I think it's Paracelsus. I think that's how you're supposed to say it.
Paracelsus, whatever.
Paracelsus.
Paracelsus. We'll go Paracelsus because I don't know how to say it. So Paracelsus really goes into that, right? He talks about how the actual refining of the soul from base metals into gold is the ultimate purpose of the transmutative process of the human being. Like, that actually is. And I love the phraseology that he uses there too, right? Because if you look very careful, and I reread it again. I was like, wait, what? He says, the alchemical process that's transmutative for the soul, not done by the individual, but allowed by the individual. And I was like, wow, that's really cool. So there's beauty to be held there, man. It's not like one and done. And so, like, when I tell you stuff like I did just a while ago, right, that our actual intentions, and as you read through this book, you'll see this. Kozyrev goes into this, the famous theoretical astrophysicist. He breaks down how time and space cause this crazy twisting right?
There you go. That's where I wanted to go next. Perfect.
And so that twisting imbues physical objects with information, memory, all sorts of other stuff we can totally get into, but just to kind of seal my point here is that the actual intentions of the human being are written on the materia prima. That's by design. That doesn't, there's nothing evil about that. That's just the way it works, bro. Like, you don't have to like it, but it is what it is, right?
Right. And I, and I want to touch on that. So going back to, because we kind of hinted about it and joked about it a little bit, like this concept of space, right, and planets and stuff like that. I'm agnostic on the whole flat Earth thing.
I can't get on board with it.
I'd love to see more evidence. I'll just leave it at that. But
yeah,
these
I just
guys,
can't get on board with it.
Right?
I get you.
I mean, I believe in space.
Yeah,
I don't think that NASA.
Well, flat earthers do too, right? Like, they don't think that.
I don't know, man. I've had some on that didn't
really, like, outright.
I mean,
it's just the firmament.
Something like that.
Well, I would say that's not even a biblical concept. Like, biblically, like, there is clearly more than one heaven, right? So there has to be some sort of space. Whether we can get there or not, you can debate all day, but
something's up there. Something is up there. I'm still going to call it space.
Yeah.
Or at least, at the very least, I'll call it the heavens. I do believe in planets. That's what I've talked to people who do not believe in planets. They think that's something else up there. Anyways, I think that planets are round and that they move, and I think that these alchemists were working with the heavens in that kind of a way.
I'm on board with you.
That's what you see in virtually all these alchemical texts, especially Paracelsus, is they are factoring in where the planets are to do their alchemy.
It's wild.
And I lost my place in this book, but I think I may have wrote down the wrong page, but there's a part in here that talks about astrology and the earth and the interesting connections between heaven, space, and earth. And when I say earth, I mean like physical ground, like stones and crystals and stuff like that. Now, I never use this phrase. I'm cringing already because I'm about to use this phrase.
Okay. I'm bracing.
As above, so below.
Dude, yes.
I don't ever use it. I've heard it. Can I break this down? People just throw it out. They don't know what it means. It's become an idiotic adage that people get tossed around carelessly. But for these guys, what they were saying by that is that there is a connection point. It's a very dense concept, but that there is a connection between the heavens and earth, and there's an alchemical
process.
Well, like an alchemical vein between the two.
Fair enough.
It's almost like there's a biological connection between the two somehow, in like a metaphysical kind of a way.
Well, if we're talking about sentience, I don't see why not.
Right. It's not biological in the fact that maybe we might perceive it as, but there's some sort of they're all connected, and there's some sort of a function, and there's some sort of a bodily. I don't know. They've been put together in a way to where they work together like clockwork or something. So,
I'd really like to touch on that Egyptian concept, if that's cool.
Yes, because I wanted to get into go ahead.
The good stuff, So that whole as above, so below, there's a lot of aspects, like you just said, to it. But the Egyptian concept is really that there was an essential, what you and I would probably call, right, like the how do we say it in scientific terms nowadays, like the that matter was highly condensed into one tiny thing. That's what we usually say. The difference here is that the Egyptian would say that the non-existence was all one undifferentiated matter. In other words, it was all one single thing. There was no differences in it. It was all completely is it homogeneous, when it means that it's the same throughout, right? Homogeneous. And it was a homogeneous thing. And then as there was what is called the primary schism, which is the original breakage, you're looking at essentially like a break into different matter. In other words, the undifferentiated matter differentiated.
Yes.
And began to create what you and I now know as Newtonian physicality, but it also created non-Newtonian physicality. It created I mean, it is all those things. I mean,
I think so I used the word vein because I was searching for words a second ago. I'm trying to describe this connection between heavens and earth, and I used the word vein. And what I mean by that was like a network of veins, like you would see in biology. But what I'm trying to say is like I mean it in a mycelium network kind of a way.
Okay. Yeah, I think that the term that alchemists use is really appropriate, is the lattice work. I think that's really good. That's my favorite term, and it really makes a lot of sense, dude. I mean, and I want to lay these out. This is super quick. Materia prima is space, is undifferentiated matter. It can be referred to as air. It could be referred to as crystal or the lattice work. It can be referred to as the divine essence, the divine quaternary, the ether. On and on and on and on. There are tons of expressions for this because it's sort of ineffable, right? I mean,
right. Like, and with the lattice work thing and this as above, so below, I'm gonna say it one more time.
Yeah.
What you're saying is this lattice work. I love that, dude. And you're right. Yeah. I've read that before, but you're right to highlight that lattice work of the heavens and the lattice work of the crystals within the earth.
Yeah.
Because their crystals look like lattices, or they have that quality. So there's a great, comparison right there.
As you're saying it, and this is a concept I've had since I actually read the book I referenced a while ago, which was Revising Reality. When they said lattice work, what actually came to mind for me was, dude, I'm sorry, I'm gonna forget the word in English. It's always in my brain in Spanish. Sorry. When you have like what painters use when they a scaffold, you have a scaffold, right? Like that's what comes to mind between as above, so below. You have a scaffolding work of where the origin point came from the top downward, right? Like it trickled down. And so you have a scaffold, there's a way to get back up, but obviously a scaffold gets smaller and smaller and smaller as it heads back up to its final origin point, right? Because it's dangerous the farther up you go. And I would say that the lattice work, I dare say that it's probably very much the same way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, so different crystals.
I love that you're mentioning this. This is so good.
Are associated with different moon phases.
Yep.
As well. Yep. So now I've never told this story before, and I'm almost hesitating to tell it right now, but I'm going to. This is the podcast to tell it because it's a super woo woo.
Yo.
I have this moonstone right here.
Mm.
Because, and I didn't plan this out, that it just so happened that the first podcast I ever did was on Halloween night during a full moon.
Mm.
And I was like, there's got to be something, there's significant stuff to it. I'll just leave all that out for another time. But it was a very synchronistic kind of a thing for me. So I looked up the crystal associated with that moon phase, and it's moonstone. So I ordered one just to have right here. It's right here next to my laptop for when I podcast.
Memory, yeah.
There's nothing else woo-woo or magic like about it. It just represents my first podcast. But this is the song, cool, man. This is the crystal associated with that moon phase the first night I started. And it's funny because I later found out that this is also referred to as a worry stone, which is something that you hold to kind of calm your nerves. It's like a stress reliever. And I didn't know that until recently, but it's funny because, I've always reached out and grabbed this whenever I get nervous on a podcast.
That's interesting, dude. That's really interesting, man.
Yeah.
You're grabbing it out. Don't be nervous. Nah, yeah. I'm kidding, man. That's really cool, dude, that you're mentioning that. Since we're on the topic of, personal stories, I mentioned this not too long ago, and I guess unintentionally to jump this way, but since we're kind of already going to go in the direction of Philosopher's Stone no matter what, it's just going to happen. There was, and I mentioned this on a previous podcast, I don't even know why it came up. I think it's because I was reading this book actually at the time. One of the things I really enjoy, and I actually wrote this out, I wrote each one of them out in my notes. I took copious notes for this, is the phases of the changes in colors when confectioning the Philosopher's Stone. And, I'm not going to go into all those. You essentially start with white and you get red. That's basically, what most people say when they're trying to make this thing. But there's a bunch of other color phases in between. Well, we're talking about the moon, so it only seems appropriate. When I was 5 years old, I had just moved to where my parents live now, which is El Paso, Texas. I no longer live there, but that's where I grew up basically. And I had a next door neighbor who was a friend from the previous city that was a good buddy of mine. And actually, she lives in San Antonio, not that far from me now, but I haven't met up with her in ages. But we were super, super close when we were little. And it was night. If I'm not mistaken, it was a full moon. And I was out there playing. I had one of those tiny little trampolines, the single trampolines that we all had when we were kids and back in the 80s, right? And I was jumping on the trampoline. We were talking, and I looked up at the moon, and it was white. And we kept talking, and I looked back at the moon, and it was yellow. And I was like, well, that's weird. The moon's yellow. So I ran inside to tell my parents, hey, the moon's yellow. I was 5, right? And I come back out, and the moon's green. And I'm like, what? And I go back in, and the moon's blue and purple and red. I mean, and it just color after color until it finally phase shifted back into white. But I remember this very characteristically. I mean, this is one of those things that I'm not making it up. I didn't, this is something like I actually witnessed happen. And I was thinking about that. I'm not telling you this has anything to do with the creation of the Philosopher's Stone or anything like that. I just thought it was really, really fascinating. And
I would call that an alchemical paranormal story.
Maybe so, dude. Maybe so.
That's what because it has. I mean, I've read, heard, researched thousands of paranormal stories, and that's I would categorize that as potentially a paranormal story.
It's very weird. It's a very weird thing. And it wasn't creeped out.
It could have been something atmospheric. Sure.
But I mean, it is a little weird that it was like, when you're running inside and outside for in a period of like maybe a minute and a half maximum in your kid. Yeah, it was really wild.
Yeah, that's crazy, man. That's crazy. But yeah, so you and thanks for telling that. That's I've not heard a story quite like that. It's very interesting. You were talking about the Philosopher's Stone right before that.
Yes. Yes.
So, and I think that's a good place to pick this back up because you take minerals, crystals, ingredients from the earth to make the Philosopher's Stone, right?
Right.
So, page 38. This is one of the notes I took. He talks about what, he's kind of like laying the groundwork for like, what is the Philosopher's Stone here?
Right,
and
right.
It's cool because he cites this old book called the Sophic Hydrolith. And he goes, according to 17th century book entitled the Sophic Hydrolith, the Philosopher's Stone or the ancient secret, which is incomprehensible, heavenly blessed, and the triune universal stone of the sages, which you laid out the triune stone earlier, is made from a kind of mineral by grinding it to powder, resolving it into 3 elements, and recombining these elements into a solid stone of the likeness or fusibility of wax.
Yeah, that's wild.
So that story I told earlier where I was on the podcast and I was trying to just break this down. On that show, I was pulling from what I've read in the old text, and I ended up describing it as a soap. It's kind of like wax, right?
That's interesting.
It's not necessarily a rock.
Yeah, I mean, so there's a very interesting, and this is not quite the rock, and this is more of a powder explanation here. But I don't know if you read this, you got to this portion of the book. But it's absolutely fascinating to me. This is not something I never heard before. But they, in the portion in Exodus, when Moses comes upon the Israelites, reveling in sin, as it were, he finds them with the golden calf, and they're sitting there imbuing it with God knows what kind of spiritual power at the time. Well, he grinds the thing up, and the Bible states that he makes them drink the gold. And that was like, I was like, oh, that's terrible. What a terrible thing to happen. Well, Farrell and a lot of previous authors, and I'm talking like 1600s, right? Way back when, attribute that to an actual technology that Moses had to purify the gold, to make them drink it so that they could be purified themselves, like actually healed. Like that's actually what the idea was for. And so you think about something
and
like
enlightenment as well. I've heard
sure.
that it had some sort of an effect akin to enlightenment, like clearing up brain fog, or even sort of casting out bad ideas.
Oh, that's interesting.
I've heard that was wrapped up in as part of possibly a side effect of drinking.
Well, I mean, if we've learned anything from jabby season, right? We know that the blood-brain barrier is a big deal, and that our actual human physiology is drastically affected, in our brain by what's going on biologically within us. So, I think that that's a valid point.
I think that and I think that story has its place.
I am not a doctor, but
in the right. But I think that story has its place. And it seems there's something alchemical happening there. Now
absolutely.
Now the Philosopher's Stone,
and then just to kind of bring that home full circle, right? Because some people be like, "These damned wannabe Christian boys," right? So somebody's listening to this podcast thinking that right now. Well, let's bring it full circle and let's be clear, right? Moses made them drink this gold and he purified it. And the way the Bible the biblical text describes this gold is not regular gold. You don't grind up gold like that. There's no way to do it. It requires an excessive amount of heat to get it into that state in the first place. So this whole concept that alchemy is all bad, I think we need to tread very carefully there. I'm not telling you to go out and be an alchemist. I'm just saying, take it with a grain of salt.
Yep. So like that story, he somehow figured out a way to potentially grind it into powder. That's what it sounds like. The Philosopher's Stone cannot be a pre-existing stone. It has to undergo a change itself before it can make changes. Part of that process is going to be grinding it into powder, right?
Yep.
The stone can affect no change or transmutation until it has undergone change and transmutation itself.
Yes.
And going with the biblical tie-ins, they liken it to leaven.
Yeah. Oh, that's right. That's right. I'm glad you mentioned that.
The Israelites were not to eat leaven, yeast-made bread at times.
Yep.
There's possibly an alchemical reason for that. But back to the Philosopher's Stone. It says here he's got the 3 stages of sort of making it, right? You subject it to stress.
There you go.
AKA grind it to powder.
Yep.
You recapitulate or break it down and resolve it into its 3 elements. And you recombine those elements. You reverse engineer, right? You recombine those elements into a solid stone. Now, is it a solid stone at that point, or is it more like a waxy type, or is it more like a soapy type of substance? It probably depends on the minerals you're working with. But yeah, so this is a lot like the spagyrics processes as well. Spagyrics.
Oh, I'm not familiar with this. What's that?
Yeah. SPYG something spagyrics. Paracelsus was famous for like perfecting the process. It's basically making tinctures and what's the other word we used?
Tinctures, elixir.
Bingo.
Yeah. There's something that just like popped into my brain when you were saying that, and it made me understand something. When you were talking about the creation, the fabrication of the Philosopher's Stone itself. Now we can get into a little bit later why this is the case, but Kozyrev lays it out really well. I really, if your audience has not researched Kozyrev, dude, do yourself a favor and go read up on that guy.
That's a Russian guy that he talks about in this book.
Yes, he's the one. I'm sure you've heard what everybody probably knows about him, if you know anything about him, is the mirror that he made, the Kozyrev mirror, which is the spiral mirror that you sit in there, and he would literally have paranormal time dilated hallucinations, we'll call them. Yeah. That's something you should really go. But that's what I knew about him before I even read this book. So when I read that he was in here, I was like, oh, I'm so excited. And I learned tons of new stuff. But he infers that time and space being twisted, which we were talking about earlier, is part of that process. And what you just said about essentially distilling the actual physical properties, the Newtonian physicality, I'm talking about our physicality, breaking those things down, you have to include the materia prima back into the creation of the Philosopher's Stone. And that grinding and that wearing and that torsion, all of that is necessary to be able to imbue the Philosopher's Stone with the materia prima, along with the now differentiated matter, which would be the actual, chemicals and elements and everything that we're talking about. Sorry, I just wanted to lay that out because it's super important.
That's good. That's it, man. And where we're going with this, of course, is that the alchemists use this process. They create their Philosopher's Stone and they proceed to turn metals into gold.
Yeah.
Allegedly.
Yeah.
So, and that's where this book really picks up for me.
Mm-hmm.
Starting around page 64, you start to get these alchemical stories.
Oh yeah, those are great. I wrote them all out, dude.
Or wait, I'll come back to this.
Go for it.
Part of this is the Arizona gold story.
Oh gosh, yeah.
That's where the book. I'll come back to these other stories in a little bit.
Let's
talk about this. Let's talk about this Arizona gold. Have you seen that documentary, All the Gold You Can Eat, about Ormus?
No, but I need to watch it.
I'll send you the link. You're going to have to watch this one.
I will.
I promise you this. We could have a screening of this right now, and it would fit into the conversation.
Oh,
perfectly.
that's awesome.
That's what this Arizona gold story is enveloped in. If I remember correctly on the documentary, this Hudson guy that he's talking about, who has the farm, I think he's actually on that documentary.
Wow.
For parts of. So this is where this book takes a wild turn. This becomes one of the wildest stories ever. People 100 years from now will be like, people knew about this and nobody did anything about it. So this Hudson guy, he has a farm outside of Phoenix.
And his background, right? His background is so unlikely, dude.
It's unlikely.
Unlikely.
Yeah, it's happenstance. He's a smart guy. It couldn't have happened to a better person. He had the wits to do something about it, but he discovers. So the way I took it is he's out there and he's trying to farm the desert, essentially.
Yeah.
The soil out there, I've been to Phoenix, there's different types of flora and fauna that grow out there they're desert plants. You can't just go plant anything out there. Mm-hmm. And in his case, the soil was so enriched by sodium rich that he had to chemically apply chemicals essentially to
I don't
remember.
Sulfuric acid. Yep.
Okay, so
and it was 93%.
He has to treat
I actually wrote
the soil.
this out. Yep, and that's unlikely, right? Because 40 to 60 is what you get in car batteries. 93 is insane amount of sulfuric acid.
Absolutely. So he's treating the soil so he can grow stuff. So that's when he comes across this anomaly.
Yeah.
He discovers essentially an alien substance that when exposed to heat, that substance either doesn't register as anything, it registers as nothing.
I know. This is wild.
Or it turns into like one of many things.
Everything.
Iron, rhodium, platinum, silver.
Yep.
And apparently gold at some point. Some of it. So gold's wound up in this. So the craziest part of this is he's going around to all these labs and he's talking to the top people in their field, bringing them this substance and being like, can you tell me what it is? And sometimes it registers as nothing. So we've got something in Arizona now that's an alien substance that registers as nothing. When it's not registering as nothing, it's changing mineral types or whatever. Like
it's completely changing elemental types.
It's perfect. It's changing elemental types like the color in your story, like the moon changed colors, like the alchemical text described the change of colors to the serum, to the elixir. So he's Yeah, and there's stuff like iron and platinum,
Yeah.
and there's other like more exotic type stuff, right? And it's
Yeah. No,
also
it's wild, man.
changing its weight while it's
Yes.
transmuting.
Yep.
Now
Yep.
that's the freaky part.
I know. Well, here
That takes us back to physics.
It does. And
but
actually
quantum physics and extra dimensional quantum physics.
Yep.
Because we can get to this part, but he finds out why this thing is registering in at half the weight that it should be.
It's so wild, man. Q Hal Puthoff, right, which is the
Bingo,
the famous theoretical physicist.
Yep.
So what Hal essentially says from here, he contacts Hal, right? And I wish there's so much stuff in here. Like, it is such a cool story. And there's thing after thing after thing, but for time's sake, we'll just have to cut it down. Essentially, Hal is a very famous, well-known and renowned physicist. And he's written a paper about superconductivity. And in that paper, he describes exactly what David Hudson has mentioned, which is that he finds that when he's doing this process, and the fact that he even is able to do this process with what he has and get all these elements is insane. Like, he has to get all sorts of crazy technology compiled to even get it to work in the first place.
Right.
But when he does, he comes back with the fact that there is 44% of the mass of this, whatever it is, right, is just disappearing. It's gone. And if he reheats it to a certain amount, he'll bring the mass back. But you're sitting at a square 56%. Well, Hal Puthoff's paper literally lines out that 5/9 amount, which is exactly 56% of the weight, which is
down
crazy.
To the percentage it lines up.
The percentage.
And he didn't know Hal Puthoff until later. This is a total sync. A total sync up that this guy, Hal Puthoff's research lines up with this guy's findings while he's trying to figure out what is this substance.
Yeah.
It's crazy. That part's crazy.
It is, man. And what's really crazy, this is even crazier to me. This is what really got me thinking, especially on my second read through. The first read through, I remember I was thinking about it, but on the second one, I was like, wait, what? So
we got to tell people too what they discovered, like what they discovered was happening. I'll tell it in a minute.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Hal Puthoff's paper is about superconductivity, like I was mentioning. And superconductivity, under traditional understanding, traditional academic understanding, is that has to take place under ridiculously cold temperatures, like very close to absolute zero, for that to even happen. And what superconductivity is, to clarify, is when electromagnetism is allowed to flow without any impedance through a physical object. That's what that is. But essentially, what he was watching happen is he was doing the opposite. He was heating the thing, and the heating of this potentiality of the Philosopher's Stone was essentially losing mass, just like happens in superconductivity. But superconductivity is the absolute opposite, which is very wild. And what he ended up telling Hal ended up telling him, Puthoff, that is.
I got you on this one. They basically discovered
go for it.
That the material was bending space-time.
Yes. And not only bending space-time.
AKA alchemy is real. That's my little personal insert.
Yes. No, dude, that's absolutely right. When I read this thing, I was flying on a plane to Virginia, bro, and I was like, I couldn't put the book down. I was like,
there's more to this story. Like, we can't do it all today. That's fine. Like, that's it in a nutshell, though.
Yes.
Right. I mean, I think he ended up calling this stuff Ormus.
Yes, that's right. He did. Well, and the only point I really kind of want to put the bow here is that what Hal tells him is what, to me, like, got me super excited. You just said it's real. But what Hal tells him is essentially the matter that you're looking for is in another dimension. It's not here, which tells you it is on the materia prima. It's returned to the materia prima, which is why it's lost mass, which is why it's easy to transmute, because it's not working the same way. There's a portion of the materia prima that's directly interacting with this substance, which is wild.
Which could be, this could be misconstrued as witchcraft.
Yeah.
As well, right? Going back to, like, our talk early on in the episode where we're like, there is something more alchemy, something more supernatural. I think you used the word ritual, and I don't disagree.
Yeah.
There is seems like a ritual element to some of this stuff, but also because what we just explained seemed like magic.
Right.
Absolutely. But it might just be a form of higher science that we just don't understand yet.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, man, I mean, really, it's kind of what Farrell mentions, and you mentioned, you referenced what he says about Adam, right? That Adam was well acquainted with these concepts. These were not unfamiliar things.
And today they get labeled as a cult because we just don't understand.
Exactly. And that's such a failure on the church's part, dude. It's huge failure. Instead of addressing these things head on, we get terrified and say that they're occultic. Well, occultic just means you don't understand, bro. Occult is just like saying you're ignorant. Like, just call it what it is. If you don't understand something, and the word I like in particular is arcane, because I think that kind of avoids this whole, this boogeyman thing that's hiding behind everything. If you call something arcane, it just means not a lot of people know about it. Right.
Well, there's a quote in the book I thought that summed it up nicely, and that is Dr. Farrell says, we have an inbred modern skepticism towards all things extraordinary.
Yeah.
Programmed.
Yeah.
We're programmed to think, we're programmed to just dismiss or to think, oh, it must be something weird or woo-woo, right?
What's genius to me is that, and I mean no disrespect to anyone. I mean this in literally the most love I can possibly give. I'm American, but I've lived abroad. I've lived in other countries. I know what that's like. And I love my country to death, but I won't for a minute believe that, that this is like the pinnacle of existence, because we have lost so much essential knowledge to even understanding why the gospel's even relevant, right? We've thrown it in the trash. And I think that this exploration of stuff just like this, of alchemy and things like it, is a huge disservice, not only to Christianity, but to humanity, man, in general. Like, it's laughable, if we can even call it that.
I think it got stripped out, and I won't go into this because
it's a long story.
I've said all this a lot, but I think it was stripped out of the secular institutions.
Yeah.
And we see that today with CERN, that they won't accept that there's a supernatural or spiritual element to all this, which there is.
Yeah.
In my opinion, they won't accept it. And then going back to the church and the service that has arrived out of that, it's been stripped out of the churches as well.
Absolutely.
This belief in the supernatural altogether. Bible's a very supernatural book, and you don't necessarily, you get a very bare bones, dry, dusty version of that in a lot of American churches today.
Yep.
So it's coming from both areas of, both the secular and the spiritual, in my opinion, or we should call it not the spiritual, but the modern spiritual movements have been stripped of the supernatural. But I used to think alchemy was this old dated mystery.
Yeah.
But this is an invigorating subject.
This happened 60 years ago, maybe?
What Hudson?
Yeah.
I think it's more recent than that.
50, 40 years. It's somewhere around there, man.
Maybe. I mean, he's still
doing
alive.
This stuff in the 70s.
I'm pretty sure he was featured in that documentary. It's been a while since I've seen it, but they definitely referenced this case in that. You've got to see it. But this book is I think we've illustrated by way of conversation today that this book has depth, has extreme depth.
Yeah.
But it's decisively upbeat at the same time.
Absolutely.
Stories like this are super upbeat, super invigorating. And so going back to what I skipped over, you've got this whole part starting at page 64. And this is just for fun. He throws in all these old stories.
These are great.
These are awesome about how people, these are alchemists of old who were said to have actually done the deed and transmuted some substance into gold. And it's like, let's see, where do I start? You've got the Swedish general here. Let's see.
This is an interesting case, right?
Yeah. So this is from 1705.
Yep.
Swedish general
Sentenced to death.
Paikahol. I don't know how you say his last name, but
everybody.
He's convicted of treason and sentenced to death. In an attempt to get out of that, He offers the King Charles, he offers to give him 1,000,000 crowns of gold annually, saying that he could produce it alchemically.
Mm-hmm.
And he claims to have received this secret from a Polish officer named Lubinsky, who had himself obtained it from a Corinthian priest. Now that's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
That would suggest that someone in the Corinthian priesthood had access to this knowledge.
Yep.
So the king accepts the offer, and they arrange a preliminary test to make sure that this guy wasn't full of it. The whole engagement is like heavily supervised. They have a British officer there of the Royal Artillery and all these other observers. So basically, all the materials were prepped with great care in order to prevent the possibility of fraud, right?
As one does.
Basically, that's when this guy, he adds his elixir and to a little bit of lead, and a mass of gold was produced to the point where they have it recorded that it was going to weigh in at 147 ducats.
Yeah.
So, and they actually, struck a metal or made a metal and put an inscription on the metal in Latin that kind of read that this guy, Pacol, cast this gold by chemical art in Stockholm in 1706. So the records are in.
Yeah, man.
The records are in, folks.
Yep.
Now, here's the thing. These stories for years have been dismissed.
Absolutely.
Heavily dismissed.
Yeah.
But Farrell goes on to show more stories.
Yeah.
About this. Like my favorite is probably Paris, because I've come across Paris a lot in my studies. Like the Nazis invaded Paris in 1940, I believe it was.
Oh, yes.
And
I think he brings this up, doesn't he?
He may have. He may have later. He gets in. I don't know if I don't know if he talked about this part particularly about the layout, but when the Nazis invaded Paris in 1940, because we know, right, that they went to museums and they looked for gold and they took art and all that stuff. Before they did all that, they went straight to the Freemason lodges. They raided the Freemason lodges first because they wanted that esoteric knowledge.
Yeah.
That's where they had it in value. They valued it above other riches, right? And there was a guy who kind of spearheaded that. His name was Alfred Rosenberg, I think.
Yeah, that sounds right.
He was a Nazi, and he's one of these neo-pagans, right? Openly occult Nazis.
Yeah.
And what he was looking for in Paris, we have record of this. Rosenberg was looking for the Philosopher's Stone because he knew about all these infamous Paris alchemists like Nicholas Flamel.
Yep.
Probably, and Fulcanelli at the time. Fulcanelli was rumored to still be around in the 40s.
Yup.
But so there's a story here. It's one of these Paris alchemist stories. It's called The Provincial Frenchman. Let's see. There's a guy named Delisle. He caused a sensation by claiming, with apparent good reason, that he could transform iron and steel into gold. The news came to the ears of the Bishop of Senez, who, after witnessing one of Delisle's experiments, wrote to the Minister of State and the General of the Treasury in Paris that he could not resist the evidence of his senses. So anyway, in 1710, Delisle was summoned to Lyons, where in the presence of the master of the Lyons Mint, again, this is somebody who's there to observe and make sure there's no fraud. This is the master of the Mint, the guy who knows, gold.
If you're going to ask anybody, it'd be that guy.
Yeah. He made much show of distilling some unknown yellow liquid. So we're back to it in a Philosopher's Stone. That's this elixir form.
Yup.
He then projected 2 drops of the liquid upon 3 ounces of pistol bullets fused with saltpeter and aluminum, and poured the molten mass out on a piece of iron armor, where it appeared as pure gold, and was tested to be gold. So they did the same thing here. They minted it, or whatever you want to call it. They made a metal. The gold thus obtained was coined by the master of the mint into metals, and they inscribed it,
Yeah.
and with Latin, I think, and they said gold made by art.
That's crazy.
And then they put it in the Museum of Versailles.
Yep. I'm wondering if that's, you got to wonder if that's still there today. And what's really cool about this story in particular is that he's just a commoner. He's not any kind of like really well-respected, well-known kind of individual. He's just a commoner. In
Seemingly.
fact, yeah, right.
Seemingly.
Right. Who knows, right? But there's nothing else written about his life, which is very interesting. You're like, well, he probably got the knife or the firing squad or something.
Or they lock this guy up in the basement.
Yup.
And like, we're gonna up our per capita or whatever. They're gonna make themselves richer, more wealthy.
Off
They're
this
gonna
guy.
use the guy. I think they probably did. Speaking of the Nazis, what the Nazis did with a lot of their brilliant minds, they put them underground in these huge underground facilities, and they had them working on secret projects for the
No doubt.
improvement of the empire.
Yep.
For the improvement and the extension of the empire.
Yeah.
I see. That's why, because it says here, after this story, you can't find anything else out about this Delisle guy. It says, of Delisle's subsequent life, history has nothing to relate.
Yup.
So, all could be true here. Like maybe they killed the guy eventually.
Yeah.
Or maybe I don't know, or maybe they put him underground and just made him put him to work.
Yeah. Whatever was more useful for them, for sure.
You don't want somebody like that to fall into the hands of your neighbor.
No, man. I mean, absolutely not. There's something you mentioned too, by the way, about them looking there in Paris. I remember reading, and maybe I'm just like projecting or forgetting, but I don't think so. I do know that alchemy is also referred to the emerald tablets of Thoth, and that is specifically what the Nazis were calling it when they were looking for this knowledge, when they were poking around in France. That's specifically what
they had a version of Thoth that they called Toot.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So there was a Germanized god, little g god, that they derived from Thoth. And a side note, I'm starting to think, so they took the Egyptian pantheon and they Germanized it, essentially. Yeah. I think it was Toot. I think it was T-E-U-T or something like Tote, is what they called it. But it was their version of Thoth. And they also had a version of, I'm starting to think that they had a version of Ishtar as well. And they called her Astara. Or
Astarte, right?
Well, yes. I think it may have been Astarte.
I know that. The only reason I mention that is because it's the etymological roots. Like that's my favorite, right, man. That's my bread and butter. You ask me like, well, how did this come? Well, I want to know what it says, and I want to know where it came from. That's how you find it, man. That's how you find this stuff. Like, just follow the trail. It's just like following the money. You follow the words. You find it, bro.
Yeah. Yeah. So, well, I didn't mean to derail you though.
No, you're good.
What about the Thoth thing? The Germans were trying to reproduce what they read.
I just think that it's very interesting that they had already made that connection, and that's like a code word, if not a, I don't know, what would we call it? A socio-religious kind of terminology that they were using for it. They were already calling the emerald tablets of Thoth. They were calling these tablets. They were calling them like essentially the information they were looking for, so to speak, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very interesting how history has seemed to forget all of the occult ties to Nazi occult themes, even better to occult to Nazi Germany. And I mean, like, even that Ostara, that just jogged my memory. There was and I won't go into all this, but like my research, what I found are these guys, I've been calling them the shamans of the Third Reich. They're the people who were essentially just that. They were influencers to all your major Nazis. They were influencers to that Rosenberg guy, to Hitler himself, to Heinrich Himmler, to Rudolf Hess. All those guys, all those Nazis had their favorite neo-pagan shaman occult guru.
As you do.
As one does. If you're a Nazi, especially. And one of those guys was Georg Lotz von Liebenfels.
Do I know that name?
Major influence on Hitler. People might be hearing this here first because this is not very well known. There are a couple of these shamans, right? This guy, Rudolf von Sabbatendorf, is one. Walter Neuhaus is one. Guido von List, and I could just keep going. They're the influencers of Nazi Germany. Anyway, Jorglans von Liebensfels published a magazine called Ostara, named after this German goddess that I suspect is the Sumerian Inanna or Ishtar or Astarte. And that was Hitler's favorite magazine. Before he even became Hitler, he was reading Ostara magazine. When he became Hitler, the Hitler we know, the Chancellor of Germany, he was said to have had a collection of over 50 magazines, all Ostara, that kind of travel with him. Like anytime he goes somewhere, his magazine collection.
Oh, wow, that's
Ostara
interesting.
So he was super into this stuff.
Wow.
And I could just keep going with example after example here, but the Nazis were into this, and like to come back around to like physics, right? Because we talked a lot about physics here. There was a guy named Manfred von Ardeen.
I know that name.
He was a physicist who worked for the Nazis. He actually built a crude TV in 1931 as well. Very smart guy.
Really?
Yes, because the Nazis put out probably one of the first TVs, because I think they rolled it out for the Olympics in 35 or 37 or whatever it was.
I mean, those are the first broadcasts. So.
Yeah, exactly. But this guy built one in 31, right? But he was also a physicist, and I think he got into... He's one of these guys that was working underground for them, right? In these underground facilities that were ran like guys from guys like Hans Kammler and Jacob Sporenberg. They had the Nazi secret weapons project going on, and it was running full blast because when Hitler opened up the second front with Russia, they were in over their heads and they needed a miracle weapon. So they had these guys working overtime. One of those guys is this Manfred guy. Now, what's interesting here is the Russians got him after the war. We didn't. This gets into the Bell Project and all of that, right?
Yeah.
So I feel like a lot of the Nazi Bell or Die Glock stuff, we don't know much about over here because a lot of that technology probably went to the Russians.
Yeah.
So Manfred, he goes to Russia. He gets a Stalin Prize for his work. Colleagues of his in interviews would later recount that when they'd get around him and he'd start telling his war stories, he said he was witness to Die Glock back in Germany. So what they did was the Soviets, working with Manfred and other former Nazi scientists, developed nuclear fusion from this guy.
Oh, wow.
And what they called the tokamak.
Oh, wow.
And this is going to get us into red mercury, right? Because we know Manfred was working with isotopes for the Russians.
Right.
And we know in this book, Farrell presents a good case that they had developed a laser for the separation of isotopes.
Yeah.
Mercury has 7 isotopes. So I think that fell right into what they were working with, was mercury. And and specifically what his team was doing was Farrell says they were using lasers. They probably were. They probably developed one of the first lasers or early prototype. But we know that they were also doing electromagnetic separation of isotopes.
Yes, which is the more common knowledge, right?
Right. And molecular techniques for separating uranium and all that, right? So I think the Nazis had a handle on red mercury. Yeah. And the alchemical use of it.
Yeah. Do you think that that's the serum 525?
Possibly. I didn't have time to read that part of the book, unfortunately.
No, you're good, man.
I'm gonna have to go back and read that particular part.
That's what I was, man, it took me a long time to read this book just because I had so many things going on. But it's a page turner, dude. This whole thing is a page turner. I'm curious. I just out of curiosity here, have you ever read
Well, the Indian Vedic
Or-
texts play into this too, by the
I
way.
know that's something
So-
have you done research on that, by the way?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's cool. I really want to get into that.
They were using red mercury. So I just spared everybody the details there with where I was going with that. Basically, with scientists like Manfred Ardeen, I think the Nazis were able to develop an early tokamak prototype, something they used probably for free energy. They probably tapping into that, and anti-gravity as well.
Yeah.
I'm not saying they built a straight up UFO. I do think they got something to lift off the ground, though. I think they were working on it, and Mercury plays a big role in that, because if you put Mercury in a torus, like a tokamak, which Manfred develops for the Russians, he develops the first tokamak for them. With that Mercury, you magnetize the torus, and if you rotate the Mercury, you like pressurize it and maybe electrify it, you get anti-gravity properties as well. You get alchemical flight, essentially.
Alchemical flight.
And that's what is described in the ancient Indian Vedic text. They talk about, literally, they say you put Mercury in a flying disc. And they call them Vimanas, right?
Yeah.
So
that's the text I would need to get into. Hey, I'm just curious. Have you read Bevor, I don't know how to say it, Bevor Hitler kam? Have you read that book before?
No, I'm going to order it though. That was Liebenfeld's, right? That was Jorg Lantz von Liebenfeld's book. No, that was Spottendorf's. I'm sorry, Spottendorf. Yeah.
Yep. That's when when I was reading through this, I was like, oh, that's one I'm gonna have to pick up. I'm really curious about the preforming the war. Anyway, I'm derailing us. My bad.
No, you're good. That works because it's interesting. There is that's probably more aligned with the true story of what actually happened there. When that book came out, the Nazis shut it down.
Oh, big time, quick.
They banned publication of it.
Yep.
They burnt copies they could get their hands on. They literally shut it down, and I suspect they did so because they didn't want that true story getting out there. That they basically based everything they did off of the occult.
Everything.
And Spottendorf was a big part of that. The guy who wrote the book. Because they used he created the Thule Society.
I didn't realize it was him. That's interesting.
Yeah. So, and the Thule Society became the German Workers' Party, which became the Nazi Party.
Right.
The Thule Society was using the swastika.
Yeah.
They had a bent version of
which is such a misnomer. That actually plays directly in I mean, you probably already know this, and your audience probably likely knows it as well, but I just think it's really fascinating that I mean, what the swastika actually means, right, is talking about the actual torsion of the universe itself, right? The torsionary nature of the universe, which plays right back into the materia prima, which is why it's so relevant to the Nazi symbol. I mean, it plays into the materia prima, it plays into the Philosopher's Stone, it plays into the actual use of how to levitate things, right? That they were working towards that, which is essentially you get the what is it called? Tim, off the top of my head, I'm not gonna remember. Is it the farmland conversations? Is that what
the farm tapes or whatever that is released? Tapes? Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, well, and right then and there, right, you're already seeing. It's really interesting. This is from a linguistic perspective. That's what's so interesting, man. You see what they call these lasers. They call them death rays, which is so telling. Like, you're like, well, what do you want it for? Well, obviously, you know what they want it for, right? Like, if they're gonna give it a name like death rays, what are they researching it for? That's the only thing they could want it for. And so,
it may have come out of that laser that they developed to separate isotopes.
I'm sure it did, or one led to the other. It's kind of like,
that's one of the thoughts behind that, Yeah, I mean, and there was another Nazi facility that near Linz, where blueprints were found there of unknown engines that ran on mercury. This was a Nazi facility where they found it. So there's a whole, this is late in the program to open up too many doors, but you could go down the red mercury thing, and that's found stuff, man. And also so I think they knew how to use that, and they were preparing to use that to put in some sort of flying device, or they figured out the free energy capabilities of it, or both, because there are articles that I've come across. I think one was an Israeli magazine, and one was maybe a Norwegian magazine or newspaper. They ran these articles where they talked about how they found a German U-boat from the war, and they went down there and they had to bury it in concrete and rubble because they were afraid of the content seeping out into the ocean, because what it had on board was tons of mercury.
Whoa, yeah.
The Germans were taking it somewhere in Indonesia or Japan, maybe.
That's exactly right.
But they had their hands on all this red mercury, and there's never been a sufficient reason as to why.
Yeah.
I think it goes back to the stuff we're talking about.
I think you're absolutely right, man. I mean, and I think that it, and that's what's so fascinating about alchemy itself, right? There's so many applications that they could use that for, like a ton of applications, not only weapons, but obviously, die Glock and stuff like that. I mean, you get just thing after thing after thing that this was like their golden calf, so to speak. This was the prize for them.
Yeah. And you know what, since you mentioned this thing earlier about some of this knowledge and making its way to China, right? To maybe even further south Asia, right? But totally. And I was kind of like thinking, maybe one of Noah's sons went down there and put that with him. Like, there's a lot of this knowledge is still there in Tibet.
Totally. Yeah.
And the Chinese have their hands on it, but in Tibet for sure, because that's where the Nazis went. They took that excursion to Tibet. They went to the lost city of Lhasa, where there's a fortified Tibetan library there. Who knows how old it is? But that's where all these Vedic texts are stored. And they spell out this alchemical flight, right? Yep. So, and the Chinese government recently came out and said that they sent a team in to Lhasa, to the library, and took some of the Vedic texts and implemented it. They were going to implement it in their space program, their current space program.
Of course they are.
And it's all this Vimana stuff, man.
That's wild.
Occult Nazis and Vimanas. I wanted to at least touch on it because he does have a part in the book here about, the occult Nazis, esoteric nationalism and all that. But
no, it's really good.
This was good, man.
Yeah, good stuff.
Was good.
Dude.
This was fun.
I hesitate to even bring up China because I could talk about that all day, dude. But
that's right. That's where I was going with that. Is that I think that knowledge ended up down there.
There's a slight mention in the book, right, of Ge Hong, who is essentially, what do we call it? He's recognized as having created the elixir of life, right? The eternal, and it's in a pill form. So we're going back to the powder. But what was so fascinating to me, Tim, was that the way this dude did it, right? He said that you needed absolute hermeticism, which is, total isolation from everyone else. So that allows you kind of a spiritual channel to kind of work with or kind of bake in. But what's really crazy is that he's like, you need a high mountain. You can't just go to any mountain. It has to be a high mountain. I'm like, of course it freaking has to be a high mountain. Where else would you go to commune with the higher's, right? Like that's wild, dude. Wild stuff.
Yeah. There's something to that too. The higher places, it's all throughout the Old Testament. Where God kind of orders them to take down what they call the high places.
Yeah.
Because the shamans were going up there and using that for some reason, like the elevation or something. I mean, you find it in the Tower of Babel story as well. They had to go up high into the earth or into the atmosphere to do. I think that was for a portal. Personally, I think they were trying to open up a portal there, potentially to go back to the Garden of Eden.
Yeah.
I mean, because it reads in Genesis, it almost reads as if when God sealed that off, it's kind of, I don't know, for lack of better term, invisible up in the air.
A buddy of mine thinks that, so if you look at Heiser's work, he really believes that it's kind of common knowledge now amongst most academics that have to do with where the Garden of Eden was on a hilltop. It was on a mountain, right? And what a buddy of mine, David Paxton, shout out to the Hidden Day podcast. He believes that essentially that when Eden was closed off, it was closed off by a plasma sword. It was like completely like a big old plasma field covered over that, and that impeded the entrance anymore after that. And so yeah, you would.
But it was up. It was up high, right?
Yep.
So yeah, man, that's crazy. And but whatever they were doing at the Tower of Babel, they were using elevation to.
Well, it's really weird, Tim, that when you think about the Tower of Babel, because the Tower of Babel actually was built in a valley, which is super weird. It's in the Valley of Shinar. And obviously they were building up. I mean, they would, if you're building some sort of tower, erecting some sort of ziggurat, right? Like you're going up. But the curious thing is like, why in a valley? Like there was clearly something
ley lines
there. Yeah, that's true too. That's true too. But I would say,
I think it was some sort of a vortex point.
It must have been, dude, because there's no reason to build in a valley when you're going to go for elevation, right?
I mean, we know, at least some of us, I have a good, strong suspicion that the ley lines are very real.
Oh, I'm convinced that they're real.
The ancient people built their temples and cities and structures on them, and they line up.
Well, we're reticent to believe that, the magnetic field that guides all creatures on Earth works just fine, but there's no such thing as ley lines. Give me a break, dude. Come on.
Geometric. There's probably a geometric form to it. There's lines,
a lattice work,
if you will. I thought it. Yeah. You said it. And like, I love all this research. We can start to wrap it up here.
Yeah,
you mentioned Heiser.
Dude.
Just to kind of touch on something that we were talking about earlier, to do with how shady some of this information can be perceived by people, especially in the Christian community. I just want to say this. If Heiser hadn't gone into the esoteric realms, I don't know that we would be having a conversation at the Divine Council and many other very important spiritual concepts that you find in the Bible.
Yeah.
He had to go there, though, right? He had to look at the esoteric realms to sort of bring clarity to other doctrines.
Well, if you don't get your hands dirty, then you don't know what you're talking about.
Right. And I think the alchemy topic is important because the supernatural
it's
a part of this.
It
was taken out of early science.
Yep.
Like I said, and it was sort of taken out of these early pockets of believers or something. It was I don't know, man. It's like, okay, science became secular alchemy, and the church became secular religion.
Yeah. Wow. That's a statement. It is important to dig into this stuff, and I'll tell you in particular why. There are not many things, Tim, that we can do as humans that directly affect the divine. There are a few, which is prayer, meditation as well. Fasting is another. But this alchemical process clearly does have a spiritual implication to it, and it has a spiritual effect, right? Otherwise, this substance wouldn't be losing mass. That was like the clincher for me, dude. When I read that Hudson found out that 44% of that mass was gone, I was like, it went to the freaking spiritual realm. What a wild thing to happen. That's so it's so unbelievable, right? And so you understand that it's not spiritual realm one on top of the other. It's fused, bro. Like they're like this. They're interlocked. Yeah. So that's my final thought anyway.
No, that's a good final thought to end it on. It is. Wow. That's it, man. I mean, I don't know how close we are to this other realm, but I've often referred to it as a neighboring realm. And I do think I do think we're interlocked with it. And people have even suggested that the ether is something that happens in relation to, so if we're up against this realm and there is this fusion, there's going to be telltale signs of that. There's going to be reactions. There's going to be, maybe even a reactionary substance between our realm and the spiritual realm.
You go.
And so there's all kinds of fun stuff here for people to unlock and decode, man. So this has been great.
Likewise,
thanks for coming on.
Absolutely.
Tell everybody where they can find you.
Yeah, man. You guys can find us on Facebook, on Instagram, TikTok. You can go to solo.to/TheCTDW. I'll say it again. solo.to/TheCTDW. You can find everything there. We're on Spotify. We're on YouTube. We're on anywhere you get your podcasts. We're trying to be on. So, yeah, go hit us up, man. I think that's it. That pretty much covers it.
Thank you. As always, break the mold, conquer the realm, and thanks for listening.
Thank you for watching this episode of the Christian Theological Dark Web Podcast. For all questions, collabs, or comments, contact us at solo.to/TheCTDW or the Christian Theological Dark Web at gmail.com. To become a special access member or support our ministry, sign up on Spotify or Patreon. This has been another Four Dragons production from the CTDW. God bless, Shalom, Shalom, and Maranatha. Come, Lord Jesus.